start at 2 p.m.
Okay.
London time. No
Okay.
problem.
Okay. Hmm. Yeah. So the stage is all yours.
So
Hmm.
thank you so much, Umama, and the organization for this kind invitation. It's my pleasure to be here discussing the importance of real-world data and real-world evidence for the scientific knowledge discovery and improvement of patient lives. So that's what I'm going to address. I have a bias, let's say, on real-world data. I work in this area, so my presentation, the materials I have prepared will cover not only real-world data and real-world evidence, but more specifically real-world data. So let me share some slides I have prepared for you. Let me just move to the right window.
Antonio, I have a little request.
Sure.
Our host has prepared a short introduction of you.
Yeah, sure, of course. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you.
She want to introduce you in front of everyone.
Thank you
After
so
that,
much.
the stage will be all yours.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining early. Ritika, you can continue, please.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of SCRMP, it is my pleasure to warmly welcome all the participants, students, researchers, and professionals joining us today for this insightful webinar. My name is Ritika, and I will be your host for today's session. SCRMP is growing as a global platform connecting students, researchers, industry professionals, and academic institutions, and we are actively working with CROs, pharmaceutical companies, and universities to promote knowledge sharing and professional development in the healthcare and life sciences sector. And today's topic is extremely relevant and impactful in the modern healthcare and pharmaceutical landscape. Our webinar is titled Real World Data and Real World Evidence in the Life Sciences Industry, driving value from data to decision making. And in today's era of data driven healthcare, real world data and real world evidence are transforming the way pharmaceutical companies, researchers, and healthcare professionals understand treatments, improve clinical outcomes, and make better decisions for patient care. This session will provide valuable insights into how real world data is collected, analyzed, and applied to generate meaningful evidence that supports innovation in healthcare. We are truly honored to have a distinguished speaker with us today who brings executive expertise and global experience in this field. Now, before I begin, I would like to briefly go through a few housekeeping guidelines. I would like to request all the participants to keep your microphones muted throughout the session. We will be having a Q&A session at the end of the webinar where your questions will be addressed by our speaker. Now, without further delay, let me introduce our esteemed speaker for today. It is great privilege to introduce Professor Antonio Valente Sir, PhD MBA. Professor Antonio Valente Sir is a senior life science executive and senior international lecturer with extensive experience in the pharmaceutical and healthcare industry. He currently serves as the Senior Business Development Director at IOMED Medical Solutions, a company that uses artificial intelligence to activate and analyze real world data for observational and clinical research in the life sciences sector. Prior to joining IOMED, Professor Valente had led the Segnal Health Data Spain business unit in Barcelona, where he worked extensively on healthcare data analytics and pharmaceutical intelligence. Through his work, he supports pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies in leveraging the real world data and real world evidence to drive scientific discoveries and improve patient health outcomes. Alongside his industry career, Professor Valente has been an active academic. He serves as a lecturer at several prestigious institutions, including the European University in Portugal, ESIC Business and Marketing School, the ESAME Pharmaceutical Business School, and EIG Business School in Spain. At these institutions, he teaches real world data, real world evidence, business intelligence, marketing research, and digital marketing in healthcare. His academic research focuses on healthcare policy and physician prescription behavior, making him a leading voice in understanding how data influences real healthcare decisions. We are truly privileged to learn from someone with such a unique combination of industry leadership and academic expertise. Without taking much of your time, it is my great honor to invite Professor Antonio Valente to deliver today's session. The stage is all yours, sir. We are eager to learn from your insights. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your kind introduction. So let me start by sharing my screen, share the right window. So normally you should be looking into my PowerPoint presentation now. Blue screen, yeah? So, okay, I'm assuming you are seeing my PowerPoint. So thank you once again for the kind invitation. It's my pleasure. I really love doing events like this one. And the agenda I've prepared includes several topics. So we'll start with base concepts. Then we'll move to the main sources of real-world data that the life sciences industry uses to generate evidence and create value. I'll also discuss with you some of the rationale and benefits of using real-world data. I will provide you an example of a real database consisting of patient records anonymized for you to see how it works in practice. The industry usage of real-world data, so you have the life sciences, they may use it for research and development purposes or market access or different settings and goals. Of course, real-world data and real-world evidence also have limitations too, and we should be aware of ethical considerations, because if we are using patients' data, then we should really be careful. So we'll discuss also topics of data privacy, data anonymization, pseudonymization, informed consent, opt-in or opt-out. So several topics we will discuss too. I'll share also some additional insights, key takeaways, and then of course we'll have our questions and answers. And at the end, I will provide you some readings that you may find useful if you want to know more about these topics. So the goals of the session are to provide you a basic understanding of what real-world data, real-world evidence concepts are, and how we in the life sciences use those instruments or tools to help create evidence. And this evidence will help decision makers approve indications, approve certain prices, approve changes in the guidelines of the treatment. So my goal is to really provide you a basic understanding of what these concepts are and how you use them to help patients have better lives, because at the end, that's what we are looking for here. So if you are more advanced in these topics, so please be kind. I prepared this presentation really to give you basic understanding of these topics. So at the end, I would be happy if we could have a basic understanding of what RWE and RWE are, know the main sources, why are companies and institutions using real-world evidence, what are the goals, and what are the main challenges here, because many things are happening. You have the FDA, you have the EMA, and other institutions doing very good initiatives, and having these initiatives ready to help define standards of quality, and it's really important what is happening. I believe that, and at least until 2030, this industry will keep growing at double digits. So if you are excited with this area of real-world data and real-world evidence, I think it's the right time to jump in. So base concepts. We all hear about drug safety, big data, reimbursement, medical affairs, market access, regulators, HTAs, research and development, real-world data. So real-world data and the real-world evidence are linked to all these points, even sales and marketing. But that would be for a later discussion. So from a scientific point of view, institutions, HTAs, payers, etc., demand or require data that can help demonstrate in the real life with real patients, real physicians, real interactions to complement the evidence gathered in clinical research, in clinical trials, right? So this is a topic that I will also discuss with you. So real-world data and real-world evidence touch all these points here and many more. I prepared this word clouds. And the concepts of real-world data and real-world evidence are very simple. So the first one, real-world data, is data related to the data that is collected every time a patient interacts with his or her healthcare system. I mean, um, primary care consultations with the GPs, visits to the specialties in the hospital in external consultations, visits to the emergency room, and many other interactions. If this data is collected properly about patient health status or vaccination, etc., from a variety of sources, then this is data coming from the real world or real world data. And it has evolved so much. When I started my career in the 1990s, many things were still done using paper, which was a mess. I mean, we had something called patient diaries and physician diaries every time we'd like to have evidence to detect patterns in those data, right? So, but now, of course, it's everything used in a digital way. It facilitates a lot the collection of this data. And then real-world evidence appears when we use this data coming from the real world to generate evidence. And in this evidence, we are really trying to find patterns here. Small example. A pharmaceutical or biotechnology company may be interested in demonstrated with real patients, with their real interactions and comorbidities, ethnicities, etc. They may be interested in demonstrating that their treatment, let's say drug A, works better in a real setting than drug B, C, or D. And then they will query the database asking, oh, how many medical appointments do these patients have, the ones being treated with product A, B, C, etc.? How many medical leaves there are in these patients, and how many hospitalizations? What about the mortality? What about comorbidity? What about the cost of treatments? And then they may find out that maybe their treatment is behaving in a more effective way. We are not looking at efficacy here and safety because that was covered in clinical trials. We are really looking into, in real settings, does this treatment perform as it was supposed to perform? And then, of course, many companies can use those patterns and evidence and, the burden of the disease, what the health infrastructure saves by using this treatment in first line instead of that one. Those are incorporated into value dossiers that can then be submitted for pricing requests, for reimbursement requests, and other topics. So real-world data transformed into real-world evidence by detecting those patterns in the data. And real-world data, sometimes my clients ask me, so what's the difference between primary data and secondary data? So primary data is the one that is collected specifically for research purposes and is typically prospective. So from here to the future, it is ad hoc, which means that it is specific to the needs of that study, of that protocol. Whereas with secondary data, which is the most commonly type of data used in real-world data, as you know, the data is collected for other purposes. So the data is collected for the normal management of patients' health in hospitals, health centers, clinics, etc. And then we use this data retrospectively, so to the past, anonymous data, to detect those patterns that I was mentioning. So one thing is primary data, and another one is secondary data. So this is a summary of what I've discussed so far. So real-world data plus analysis and interpretation and detecting those patterns I was mentioning before creates actionable and meaningful real-world evidence. And this means that the goal of detecting those patterns and generated good evidence is, of course, contributing again to scientific knowledge discovery and to the improvement of patient outcomes. You can tell me, but companies do earn money and have profits doing that, right? So the pharmaceutical biotechs, of course, it's legitimate. So on the one hand, they are benefiting the patients, having better treatments with higher access to these new medicines, and of course, they have to have business and profit as well because they invest a lot generating those drugs and testing them in clinical trials, etc. So it's all in all, it's a win-win situation, also including the healthcare authorities. Now, another topic which I think is important to distinguish is the difference between electronic medical records and electronic health records. So the first ones are parts of the second ones, like in this scheme here. In blue, darker blue, the electronic medical records, which are typically less connected. So this could be, for instance, the information that the physician specialists store in a private setting. So they have the medical treatment history of the patients in one practice. On the other hand, electronic health records are more holistic. So they include linkage between primary care, secondary care, some of them also private healthcare settings. So they can have scientists using this data, researchers can have like a 360 view of what is happening with these patients in terms of,
Antonio,
yes.
really sorry for the interruption. Your slide is stuck to page one.
Oh, oh, I'm so sorry. Let me try
No
again. So
problem. No
to,
problem. Yeah, we're
I,
able to see the base concepts now.
so let me try again.
Okay.
Maybe I think will be best for me to share the full screen, and this will not happen again, this problem. Apologies for that. So if
No
I share
problem.
the entire screen, normally you should be able to see, do you see my slides moving now?
Yes, yes, Antonio, it's perfectly fine.
Okay, great. So the
Thank
slides
you.
I've covered before, you're very welcome. Thank you for letting me know. So this was the first one. This was the word cloud I was describing. These are the differences between the two concepts. And I think we stopped here in the electronic medical and health records. So the electronic health records, these ones that collect several systems, allow better usage of the and understanding of the patient pathways. For instance, if a patient goes to the primary care, to the GP, then is referred to an external consultation in the hospital, then goes back to the primary care, then we know that the medicines were dispensed at a community pharmacy, and then this person may have gone to the emergency room. So we have the full picture. It's very hard to have access to this high quality data, holistic one, but in some cases it is possible. Now, the main sources of real-world data, several sources. I've prepared this table. I will not go into a high detail just because we would not have time, but I've divided it into three main dimensions. So the first one, from a observational perspective. The second one, it's more like research connected, systematic reviews and meta-analysis that generate patterns using many publications and other sources. So let's start with the observational studies and with the EMRs and EHRs, so electronic or health medical records. I worked in a company that was providing these softwares. So these are softwares that physicians and nurses and pharmacists, mostly in physicians and nurses, that they use in hospitals and health centers. So let's say I'm a physician and you are a patient. So you are telling me, for instance, oh, I'm having these symptoms, headache, etc. And I, as a physician, can add those diagnosis codes into the medical history, right? I can drop a list box and start writing headache or migraine, and immediately I can add that to the medical history. Of course, if I'm prescribing something, a treatment, I will also add that to the medical history. So we have, on the one hand, structured data. So we use list boxes to choose the right diagnosis codes and the right products and prescriptions and frequency, etc. And on the other hand, we also have clinical notes, so free text that physicians write in the patient medical history. For instance, in addition to putting the diagnosis codes of migraine, etc., and the treatments, we can also add this person has a medical background of people with migraine, his mom, his dad, his brother. So text that helps generate context, and it's like the glue connecting the medical history of the patient. So these are systems, these are softwares called the electronic health or medical records. um, we also, and I would say that probably, I don't have a firm number, but at least 80%, probably more, of the real data sources come from electronic health or medical records. So also biobanks. A biobank is a biorepository that stores biological samples. It's not quite there yet in terms of usability, mainly because of privacy. It's not easy to have access to this type of data, but it's possible. Health monitoring devices and health apps. So today, almost everybody has a digital, wearable or implantable or home health monitoring system to control blood pressure, to control diabetes, to control hypertension. So many things that could be connected, hopefully, directly to your uh, patient medical history. Otherwise, it does not have much value. But there are a lot of innovations right there with internet connectivity. Um, Other sources of real-world data, so claims or billing databases. Usually, these are typically not as complete as the electronic medical or health records. They consist, these ones, of billing codes that physicians or pharmacies, many times pharmacies, share. So usually you will have what has been prescribed to this patient, sometimes associated to the diagnosis codes. So this treatment was was prescribed for this diagnosis. It's very, very important to have this linkage, and sometimes we don't have it. And hospitals, etc., and other healthcare payers that submit to, providers that submit to payers, the national health systems or insurance companies. That's how it works. So other topics, patient registries. I had some contacts with this company called Care Across. What they do is they have a patient registry. They run primary market research. So they involve these patients collecting data online, of course. And other examples are the European Cystic Fibrosis Society registry. So data is collected from consenting patients, of course. If patient gives his consent, it's called opt-in, signs, registers, and then can provide his or her data for research purposes. Patient pathways. These are usually indistinguishable from electronic or medical or health records. They allow the evaluation of drugs and treatment costs, demographics, biomarkers, and treatment sequences. But it's many times it's the same as the electronic or medical or health records. Then we can run. I've touched this point a couple of minutes ago. So we can run ad hoc research with patient and physician surveys. Now, if you ask me, is the quality of this research ad hoc based on questionnaires as good as the quality of a very well structured and maintained electronic health record? I would have to see and to analyze. Now, when you are using real-world data from electronic health or medical records, typically you will not find many biases that you may find here in ad hoc research with paper-based or electronic questionnaires by patients and physician surveys. Sometimes patients are not really prepared for the task of answering a questionnaire, may not really understand the scales and what is being asked. And physicians may be very busy and may not complete the diaries every time they receive a patient with those characteristics. So I'm not telling you it's poor quality, but it's a complementary survey. It's a complementary study that many companies are using and with good results. We also can have meetings with patients, for instance. We call them focus groups, aimed at obtaining deeper insights. These are not quantitative by nature. They are qualitative. You will not get from a sample of 8 or 10 or 12 people there, you will not get a percentage of this or of that. However, you will generate context. You will be able to understand what the impact is in their lives of their condition, of their ailment or their disease, right? So it's a complementary study to provide context to quantitative conclusions you take from real data. So it's again a complement, an add-on that you can use to better understand results and to provide this feedback, because numbers sometimes tell you, they sometimes do not tell you all the history, all the story related to what is happening to patients. Now, what is the rationale and benefits of using real data? I'll cover these topics. I have to accelerate a little bit. So the main drivers for the growing of real data and evidence are the fact that they complement the clinical trials. Clinical trials are defined in a very hermetic way, and they have to, because the goal there is to minimize the confounding or to eliminate the potential confounding. So we have to eliminate the bias, and patients are selected in a very defined way. So you have eligibility criteria, then you select a cohort, then you invite them for a clinical trial. So you are measuring mostly efficacy and safety. And then healthcare authorities, payers, etc., will ask you, well, I know that the product works, but I want evidence that it works in real settings with real patients. So it's a complement to those clinical trials to reduce the gap of those randomized clinical trials and decisions that physicians take every day in their practice. Other drivers that are helping the growth of these areas is the fact that they serve many purposes and create new opportunities for evidence generation in drug development. And you have the EMA, the European Medicines Agency guidance, requiring the collection of risk-benefit data in post-authorization or PAS studies, right? There's also an increasing demand from payers to conduct observational studies on a new product's effectiveness. Again, not efficacy, effectiveness in real settings. Of course, the growth of electronic tools, including new analytic capabilities, mainly artificial intelligence, applications of natural language processing or NLP that I'm working with at the company I'm working at, by the way, IOMED. And these are all helping generate an incredible amount of data. The problem now is that sometimes that data is put in silos and it's not usable. Many of the data, or a big part, probably 80% or more of the data, is non-structured data. It's data coming from clinical notes, but I will speak about that later. So now continuing in the main drivers justifying the growth of real-world data and evidence. The potential to improve health outcomes and cost effectiveness in new technologies. The 21st Century Cures Act from the FDA, the HTA regulation that entered into force in Europe in January 2025, that now establishes the framework where companies should use evidence for development, authorization, and supervision of medicine. So that's all building, generating or increasing the importance of real-world data and evidence. And then you have many initiatives. I'm pretty sure you have heard about some of these. Darwin EU, the Data Analysis and Real-World Interrogation Network. It's an initiative from the DMA and the European Medicines Regulatory Network that is building a federated group of sources in several countries to help accelerate the access to high quality data. And you will find, if you go there to their website, you'll find several databases coming from different countries. I mean, hospitals, registries, etc. It's a very, very interesting initiative. Odyssey, Observational Health Data Sciences and Informatics. It's an initiative. They work together to create packages of codes. It's basically created. They created the OMOP data model in after 2014. OMOP it's a common data model that is used for observational research to help facilitate the analysis. You also have EDEN, the European Health Data and Evidence Network. They provided support through grants to many hospitals and even private institutions. I worked in one of those private institutions that received the grant from EDEN to help map the data from different ontologies like ICD-9, ICD-10, LOINCS, NOMED, etc. to OMOP. NCEP, it's another initiative by the EMA, European Network of Centers of Pharmacoepidemiology and Pharmacovigilance, European Health Data Space. This one is very, very important because it will further facilitate the access in a quick way to quality real-world data, and it will provide the patient the power to control his or her data being used and moved for medical care or research purposes. So it's a tremendous change in the mindset that is happening here. Okay, let me now show you an example of a real data set, Okay, I will not cover all the tables there, but let me just show you what the database looks like. Of course, this is Excel, but you can have a CSV, you can have an SQLite database structure, but for this simple example, let me show you this. So you have patient ID in this table called patient. This is an anonymized ID. Of course, we must not know the name and the identification of the patient. You have the doctor ID, the gender of the patient, and the birthday date. So you see that on purpose, you will not find the day. You will only find the year and sometimes the month. Why is it like that? To help keep the records anonymized. Because if you have a set of, if you have a cohort, so a group of patients with a very rare condition, let's say Portugal, I'm Portuguese, so Portugal is a very small country. We have 10.5 million people, and there are diseases that are very rare. Maybe 20 or 30 people in Portugal have that disease. If you don't mask in somehow the region and the birth dates, for sure, they would be identifiable. So we have to take that into consideration. So you have also other tables, contact, for instance. So this center ID, let's say this hospital, with this contacts ID, with this patient ID and doctor ID. So let's say this was a dermatologist, I don't know. In this date, 27th of August 2015, contacts, you may have uh, a contact that is a face-to-face consultation or a remote consultation or other types of consultation, a home consultation. You then have the contact diagnosis. So again, in this hospital, with this contact ID and the contact diagnose type, so it's a diagnose in this ontology, so ICD-10, and with this diagnosis code, I don't know which one it is, but maybe it's diabetes, you see? So we code these into this ontology, but you have different ones. Then you have here a center ID, contact ID, so the contact prescription. For this diagnosis code, the physician has prescribed this drug with this sequence, with this dose, 1 or 2 doses, every 24 hours or 12 or 8, you see, duration, etc. And then you may have other tables. I will not show them all, not to lose more time. So you have this one. Let me just move this here. So you have the delivery for this ID with this diagnosis code, this product ID. The medicine was delivered in the pharmacy in the 27th of August. So the physician knows when the dispensation occurred and the delivered product. Okay, so maybe it was a generic because it's not the same. You see? In this case, it is the same. And then you have contact exams, medical acts, sick leave, and many other, allergies, antecedents, so on and so forth. So vaccination, etc. So this is an example of a true real-world data that is then used for research purposes. Okay, let me just go back again. How does or what for what is the industry doing with all this data and trying to generate evidence? So the industry, I've divided these into several dimensions. The main one is this one: pharmaceutical and biotechnology, regulators, payers. So these are the main users of the real world evidence. Okay, let's cover them. But you can have other stakeholders using real world data as well and the evidence. So let's start with manufacturers. This is very, very simplified. Okay, so again, thanks for the kindness. I try to simplify as much as possible. Maybe I could have found other ways of showing it, but anyway, therapeutical scope, economic and commercial. In the therapeutical scope, I've divided these into research and development, pharmacovigilance or safety, and medical affairs. And let's start with those ones. One of the interesting things is that many patients suffer in silence. So it means that they do not have available treatments to treat their condition, and the companies do have some difficulty finding those patients that have not been covered or are not being managed by the healthcare infrastructure, right?
So real-world data sometimes and evidence is used to discover unmet medical and patient needs. If you analyze the prevalence of a condition in one region and you detect that it is the double of the prevalence in other regions, so what is happening there? Are these people different? What is happening? I mean, it's really important to dig into that. So we can use real-world data to do that. We can also use real-world data to support clinical trial design, because we can look on what is happening with the population, with real patients. What is the average age of people having this condition? What is the number of comorbidities? I mean, other diseases they may have, diabetes, cholesterol, hypertension, anxiety, etc. So what is the characterization of those patients? Then we try to mimic those characteristics or eligibility criteria in the clinical trial. Another difficulty that many companies have and research centers is that it is very difficult to go through all the medical history of patients, for instance, in a hospital, to try to find eligible patients for clinical enrollment. And real-world data can help them, because if they add some algorithms, they can use AI to help detect patients that are eligible for this clinical enrollment. And it's really interesting. And IOMED, the company again I'm working for, helps hospitals, helps the industry find those patients using structured data and also NLP curated data, looking into the clinical notes. So these are some of the benefits that companies and industries have by using this data in the scope of research and development. But you also have pharmacovigilance and safety, because if you look into the retrospective data of patients, maybe you will find there some adverse events registered in that data. And if it happens, faster we will be able to engage with the patient or try to find out what is happening. Is this an adverse reaction in one patient or is it in 10 patients? So what is happening here? Can we detect what is the situation behind it? Is it a problem with our treatments? So it's important to have access to this data. In the scope of medical affairs, so you know that drugs are approved for certain indications. And the medical affairs team wants to know, is my drug or are our drugs sold by our company being used the right way? Are they being used off label? Are the patient profiles they are being prescribed to the real ones and the correct ones? So having access to these longitudinal sets of data, we can try to find these patterns. So let's look at the patient pathway. Let's look at the patient characteristics of those of the ones using those treatments. So good practice analysis versus patient profiles, etc., and also to help the pharmaceutical companies detect eventual needs that they have to adjust the training to the given by the MSLs to the physicians, and of course complement clinical research with other data coming from real practice. How is the treatment being used in complex conditions, in comorbidities? It's really important to have access to that data. Of course, the data is also used from a, like I would say, economic / market access perspective. So these departments guarantee that the patient has access to the right treatments in the right moments at the right cost. It's the philosophy of a market access department. And some examples: epidemiology analysis, the burden of the disease to justify a certain price for these products, budget impact models, even the pricing of the products, and accelerates also, of course, time to market, especially in situations where patients will not survive unless they are treated with a sometimes a very expensive treatment. And there are ways to accelerate the approval of these products. From a very similar, it's in the same scope, health economics and outcomes research perspective. We use data to demonstrate outcomes, to compare different treatments, to generate this evidence. Look, my treatment is better, is more effective in real practice than this one and that one, and for data modeling purposes, right, in real clinical practice. Commercial scope. Marketing. Maybe some of you are now shocked by hearing me speak about marketing using patient data. Wow. Well, it's legitimate that companies can use this data in an aggregated way, not using patient level data, right? But they can understand what is happening at the moment of the prescription, right? There are no biases. They can compare the share of prescriptions of their products against, let's say, sell-in data. I mean, market share. So the market share they have when the product moves from the wholesalers to the pharmacies, and they can compare it also against sell-out market share, which means that it's the share that when the product is sold to patients or dispensed to patients. So it's complementary data. They also can use this data to develop patient adherence programs to help improve patient health. It's a big issue, the adherence and the compliance, and identify intervention areas, help run screening initiatives, because they can detect, in this area of this country, the registered prevalence in the healthcare systems of this condition is very low. So these patients are suffering in silence. Let's engage with the health authorities and do some screening for free for these populations. Okay, they can use that as well to set their strategy. In sales, the same, health fine-tune sales forecasts, but again, in an aggregated way. They should not be using these to at a patient level data, of course. Strategic. They can find patterns that can reveal additional indications for drugs currently in use. In real-world data, we can detect that a certain drug is being prescribed off-label for a certain condition, and patients are doing well, are doing fine. Think about, the drugs that are being used for diabetes that can also be used for obesity, right? So that's one of the examples. Different stakeholders can also use real-world data, like manufacturer association, so associations of pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies to help negotiate along the regulators. You also have, of course, the health authorities that monitor adverse events and support pricing, reimbursements, and guidelines, decisions. They will ask you for comparative effectiveness, etc. So they are one of the big users, probably the biggest user. Health insurers here, not as much yet, but I think it's growing in importance, because health insurance companies, if they detect that in a real setting of patients a certain condition is growing, then maybe they may ask themselves, should we ask for a higher price for the monthly payments of the insurance, right? The health insurance. So they can use data also to optimize their strategy. Other healthcare health insurance companies, some of them do have their own private clinics, and they can benefit as well, knowing the disease history, environmental factors, and be able to implement prescription pathways like first line, second line of treatment, etc., some guidelines, so on and so forth. The distribution channels can use real-world data as well. It's not as direct, it's not for pure research purposes, but for optimization, know their patients better. And of course, hospitals and health centers, clinics, they are big users of their own real-world data because they are the ones more interested in providing a good care to their patient population, right? So they use it to help reduce the risk of a bad decision on the one hand, but also to improve the efficiency of their decisions. What is the best treatment on average, looking into the past? Oh, we were not aware, but patients being treated with this more, let's say, aggressive treatment earlier will have less hospitalizations or will die less. You see, so they can use that information as well as healthcare professionals. They can use physicians, nurses, pharmacists to better understand their population and increase patient engagement and adherence, so on and so forth. Consulting firms and contract research organizations, so the companies that usually run these studies for the life sciences, for the pharmaceutical companies, of course, use real-world data to generate that evidence that will later be presented to the authorities. Of course, last but not the least, academic researchers, universities use real-world data. We know that they need to publish. It's one of the KPIs used to evaluate professors and researchers. So they also use real-world data, and of course, patients and patient associations do have an interest in analyzing and using real-world data and real-world evidence. We are almost finishing. So what are the main limitations of real-world data and, of course, in the scope of real-world evidence? First, it's not easy to have access to quality data, and it is not usually fast, right? So you need to have a scientific legitimacy, a legitimate research question before you think of using real-world data, right? So you have to have a study protocol. In many countries, at least in Europe, you will need to go through an ethics committee. So there's your protocol here, for instance. You send it to the ethics committee for approval. If the protocol is approved, then after all the paperwork signed, so the contracts, etc., you can have access to the data for your analysis. But it takes a lot of time, right? And many times, the quality of that data is not optimal because maybe physicians are very busy and they do not put all the structured data there, and they just write, oh, I've prescribed this, I've prescribed that. And if it's in free text, it's less easy to use it. You can use NLP, of course. Real-world data suffers from internal validity because unlike a clinical trial where we can define all the controls, etc., and we can mitigate the confounding effects, in real-world data, it is exposed to those confounding factors. So in terms of external validity, there are some limitations. If the data set is small or not very well representative, even being a big one, for instance, if it's using certain profiles of people, upper middle class or high class, etc., it will not be representative of the population. And now I'm not talking about internal validity. I'm talking about external validity, or the extent to which this data represents real people from that area, from that region, from that country, right? You see? So limitations in internal validity, by other words, is what we are seeing what we should be seeing, and external validity. I mean, do these people represent the natural population of that area? So these are two limitations of real-world data. Lack of randomization, of course, it limits the generalizability. Apologies, and these are the main limitations. Of course, data quality. Sometimes we have different ontologies, ICD-9, 10, different ones. We have to map everything, usually to a common data model like OMOP. Sometimes the integration is not optimal. Difficulty in treating open text, and there are companies like IOMED to treat that open text, and other limitations. So we have to be conscious that we generate evidence, but we have to disclose the limitations associated to that evidence. Okay, so in the paper we are building, we have to mention that. Ethical considerations. Now, anonymization. Data is considered anonymized if we cannot identify an individual and there are no reasonably likely means to re-identify the individual. Once we strip the data of the personal identifiers, like the name or surname or the ID from the Social Security, then we call it non-personal data. And according to the GDPR, non-personal data can be used without patient explicit consent. So we can use it for legitimately, scientifically studies without having to ask the authorization. But if the patient wants to opt out, if the patient wants to knock the door at the hospital or at the Ministry of Health, look, I don't want to share my data anymore, then they can do it. It's called the opt-out, right? Now, you have anonymized data, which is typically or hopefully irreversible, and you can have pseudonymized data. It's when through an identifier, you can go back and identify that patient. One example, companies can use data that is anonymous. So they have access to a database, they are analyzing it, and they will see patient IDs like X001, X002, and then they think these patients could be good candidates for clinical trials. So company A is using that data, and then they send those IDs to the hospital, to the principal investigators at the hospital, and on their end, they could identify those patients. So they could check that patient X001, maybe Maria or John. So this is called the pseudonymized data using one key. So transparency. Providers and users of real-world data need to disclose the limitations of the data. One of the main limitations, based on my experience, is that mortality data is in many times incomplete. So what happens is, let's think of a situation where we have 5 hospitals providing data for a real-world evidence study. We know that the mortality is registered or recorded at hospital level. If the patient passes away in the hospital, then those databases will have that information. However, usually, if there's no connection to the central national registry of deaths, if that connection doesn't happen, if the patient dies outside the hospitals or the health infrastructure, then we will not know, and we will have an artificial, it's not an artificial, but we will have a patient that we think is alive, but it is not, unfortunately. So there are some limitations. And of course, privacy and data security, they have to take all the necessary actions to guarantee the security of the data. Some additional insights I would like to share with you, and then let's go to the questions and answers. So a concept called tokenization. It's more common in the United States. You have several companies. One example is Data Vans. I don't have any connection with these. I don't have interest in these companies, so I don't have shares. I can speak about that freely as a disclaimer. But they help map different sources of data using identifiers, because in some countries data healthcare is very fragmented, right? You have private care settings and you have multiple hospitals, and it's hard to have a good longitudinality. By other words, it's hard to have a long medical history of 5 or 10 years. And these companies help tokenize, they help identify John Smith or Jane in several databases and link them together. So this is an example. You will check that later. We don't have much time. Another topic is the concept of synthetic data. It's data created from real data that mimics the natural variation in patients and treatments, etc., but it's a synthetic one. It's a created one using artificial intelligence. Sometimes when you have a very small population with a rare condition, a rare disease, you may have 30, 40 patients in one database. It's too little, too small. Sometimes companies think of using synthetic data to create more patients and interactions that are artificial. So there is still some resistance from some companies and institutions, but it's evolving. Aetian, a company that was acquired by Datavant, acquired Replica Analytics a few years ago. It's a company specialized in synthetic data, and the FDA and the EMA have jointly released guiding principles for AI in drug development, addressing also synthetic data. So step by step, the institutions and companies are using more and more applications of synthetic data for this specific scope, but we have to be sure that the models really replicate what happens in real databases. And here you have a table that compares several dimensions of synthetic versus real data in validity, anonymization, etc., etc. The main advantage of the synthetic data is that we don't need to anonymize anything, because synthetic data does not represent real patients. But it's a technology that is being discussed. So key takeaways before the questions and answers. The importance is growing, guys. Again, if you like this area, it will keep growing. It has many usages. The real-world evidence is being requested by authorities, by payers, by deciders, and it will be having increasingly higher importance. I've just attended an event last week in Amsterdam, World EPA Congress, and I am attending every year eSport Europe and other events, and the discussions are wonderful. The technology is growing, the usage of AI, to help again increase the quality of the data and to provide more reliable evidence that can support the payers, their decisions, and improve patient lives. If you want to know more, I've just compiled a few topics. So you have eSport, you have the EMA, if you want to know more. Also topics about the European health data space and about the FDA too. So plenty of ratings for you. And now we go to questions and answers if we still have time.
Thank you so much, sir, for the incredibly insightful and informative session. Your explanation of the RWD and RWE and their role in the life sciences industry has truly given us a deeper understanding of how data can be transformed into a meaningful healthcare decisions. And I'm sure everyone found the session extremely valuable and inspiring. Now we will move into the question and answer session. And participants who have questions can type them in the chat box, and I will read them out. And Sir shall be answering the questions.
Come on, guys, you can ask questions. Antonio is here with us. Hmm. Even if it's a silly question, no problem. He'll be answering your questions. Don't worry. Ask anything you want related to job or related to how to enter into this field, anything like that. He's here to help you out. I think Antonio, they understood everything from today's session. They had a great understanding from start to end.
Hi, sir. This is Varad Raut. Sir, I have a question regarding my degree. That how can a PharmD or a healthcare student get involved into RWE research project, and how the career opportunity exists in pharmaceutical RWE and health data analytics? Can you explain me, sir?
Yeah, sure. It's a very good question. I have many students. I'm a lecturer as well as it was explained. So my students ask me, let me go around, but I'll answer to a question. So for this area, for real world evidence profiles, usually companies ask for either a medical degree, and these will be people managing or running the real world evidence studies, defining the protocols, etc., or pharmaceutical backgrounds, or a biochemistry background like biology, nurses. Also, I see many in this career of real world data and real world evidence because they are used to those concepts and terms, etc. In terms of training, additional training, most of the people I'm working with has a Master of Science, sometimes in a science topic, others in like management, but it's more like on the scientific part of things. And there are some good programs in market access and in real world evidence. I did one when I lived in Barcelona called Market Access and Health Economics and Outcomes Research. So HEOR, it's also in with high demand. So you can think about that. You can find some face-to-face programs and also online programs. And the one I did was half face-to-face and half it was online. Okay, so for people wanting to start their career in real-world data and real-world evidence, I would recommend connecting to LinkedIn and to the websites of the companies, because they have job postings there, and you can define automatic filters. For instance, real-world evidence, and your profile, your area, your preference, and then you can the same on LinkedIn. You can do that, and it will help you identify those opportunities. So that would be my recommendation. So if you are excited with this area.
Sure, sir. I will definitely look into it. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I think we have other question.
Yes, sir. We have another question, that how can bias be minimized in real world studies?
Yeah, it's a big thing, huh? It's a big thing. So bias can happen, as I've mentioned, because of lack of internal validity And there it is really hard because you are not controlling all the factors, all the variables. So you may be having confounding variables. You don't have a precise control on the outcome. You can tell this is associated with that, right? But unless you are able to control everything, you cannot create a direct causality relation. So it's, you can say likely this happened because of that, but you can check associations. You can minimize bias in external validity by having access to databases that are representative of the whole population. And I did a couple of posters, by the way, to demonstrate external validity of databases. What I did at the time was I compared the demographics of the patient database against the national demographics of the country. So I went to the National Institute of Statistics, looked into the sex and age distribution and compared it. It was overlapping on the database, real-world database, and the national one. So good there. Then you can think how to minimize further. You can compare the prevalence of the main chronic pathologies, the national ones recognized by the country and published, against the ones you are seeing in the data. So what is the percentage of people with the diagnosis of diabetes in my database, real-world database? 15%. What is the percentage of the national recognized one? 14 or 16%. So we are aligned. A third topic you can use to minimize the, I would say, the bias is to compare the prescription patterns nationally against the ones you see in the database. So if everything is aligned, you can then tell the sources of bias are minimized. In terms of internal, it's more difficult, but external validity. So these are the, I would say, the main topics. Of course, you can do other things. You can do with statistics. You can try to find some outliers there, and you can decide to eliminate some outliers. There's a source of bias that it's sometimes it's a wrong way of recording information. I can give you some examples. For instance, there are treatments that are gender or sex specific, right? So if you are treating a man suffering from prostate issues, you will prescribe treatments that can only be prescribed to men. So if you find women being prescribed those treatments, then okay, let's see what happens. So there are many things you can do, but I don't want to be quite technical. So my bias, technical.
We have another question, sir.
Yeah.
What certifications or courses would you recommend for students interested in clinical research and real-world evidence studies?
Yeah, I would say that having a master, a postgraduate, etc., in health economics and outcome research could be a good opening door, as well as, and this is not a substitute, so it can be complementary, a degree in market access. So market access is more high bandwidth because you have more topics you can cover. You can go through the health economics and outcomes research. You can study also the concepts of real-world evidence because they will be fueling the health economics models. So market access, health economics and outcomes research, real-world evidence specific programs. I did one in Oxford. It's a 1 week intense course in real-world evidence. You can also think of doing some training in epidemiology. By the way, I'm thinking of doing one in Italy. It's a 120 hours program in, what is the name of the city? Well, I don't remember, sorry guys, but it's in Italy. So epidemiology, markets access / health economics, I think would be good certifications to start thinking about this area.
Sir, we have another question. That is Ruby Kasana. She's a PhD researcher. She in pharmacoepidemiology, transitioning to industry, and she's interested in building a long-term career in real-world evidence. And she would like your suggestion, guidance to enter in this field as she has done hospital-based RWD study.
What a wonderful profile, Ruby. I mean, wow. I think once you complete your PhD, I think probably you have completed it. your profile is really, really appealing to the industry. So you have the scientific and technical background, and based on what I understand, you also have the knowledge of what's happening upstream at the origin, the way the data is collected, the data is used. So I think you have a very, very good profile. In your case, I would start probably with the big CROs. I mean, IQVIA, Senius Health, Parexel, Icon PLC, and many others. You just Google that, and you will find plenty of companies working in all the corners of the world. So definitely, I would start by there. And you can also try the big ones. Google the top 10 or the top 15 companies in the world. I mean, Lilly, Novartis, Pfizer, etc. What a wonderful profile. Yeah. In real world data and real world evidence with a PhD and the experience from the hospital side, definitely a very strong profile.
And the next question is, sir, does systematic review and meta publication help to get the job in this domain?
So let me try to find the question there. So I cannot find it, sorry.
The question is from the other.
Can you please repeat the
parts.
question? I cannot find it. Yes.
Yes. The question is, does systematic review and meta publication help to get the job in this domain?
So experience in those areas. Yes, I would say that they do. So the experience of but it will be more like downstream, because you'll have the experience of meta-analysis, which is wonderful, but I would try probably to get experience also and knowledge upstream of that, before that, right? How to build a study protocol, what are the main methodologies, the topics on epidemiology, because the people who are going to write the protocols do have to have that type of profile. So I would tell you, wonderful, but at the same time, try to have training on epidemiology, market access, or health economics and outcomes research. That would really help.
Yes, thank you, sir. And then we have another question. With the increasing use of AI and machine learning in healthcare data analysis, how do you see these technologies improving the generation and interpretation of real world evidence?
Yeah, definitely. Big help with AI. I will speak about two cases. The first case is to help identify patient profiles that could be enrolled in clinical trials. Let me speak about. So imagine that you have a rare condition. You have, let's say, 100 people in a database of 10 million people with that condition. But you know, based on the literature, that you should be having more patients, but physicians cannot identify them. You go to the medical history and you don't see the diagnosis code there. So you see what happens with those that have been diagnosed. You detect patterns, you use AI, you use vectors, and then you apply that knowledge to the rest of the patients. And sometimes you are able to find more patients that suffer with the condition but do not have a diagnosis. And then you can ask them to come to the hospital and run some tests, and the majority of them will probably have the diagnosis and start the treatment. So that's one example. Another example is the fact that I have explained, that more than 80% of the value of the data is not structured. It's in clinical notes that physicians write, right? How can we use that? We can use NLP, natural language processing. So these are algorithms by AI that will read. So imagine that the physician has written, I have prescribed acetyl salicylic acid. So the AI system has the ability to detect which was prescribed and put that into a table in structured data in the table prescriptions. It also has the ability to detect the posology. I mean, 1 pill, 2 pills, the frequency, the diagnosis code, so on and so forth. And then Of course, you have to validate a sample of that. You can use physicians, real physicians, that look into the original notes written by the doctor in the consultation, and you compare it against what the NLP, the AI system, mapped. And you put yes, yes, no, check, check. Then the system is retrained again, it's retrained, it's processed again, and then when you have an F1 score, so it's a measure of quality that minimizes false positives and false negatives. So when this score is above 90%, you are happy that the accuracy and the precision are good in the mapping of the free text to structured data in table. So that's important. It's growing a lot. You have companies in Italy, you have companies in Spain, all across the world, in Belgium. I met some of them using AI to help improve the quality of real-world data.
Thank you, sir. And there's another question. What technical and analytical skills are most important for students who want to work in the real world data industry?
Yeah, I would say that having strong basis of R, it's a language for statistics, is really helpful. I mean, my colleagues using more like technical profiles that have more technical profiles have a strong basis in R. They also have a strong basis in artificial neural networks. I mean, basically models that can be used to extrapolate data. But yeah, a strong knowledge of R would be useful, and also a strong background with basis on epidemiology.
Hello, Ritika. Just one last question, please. Already we have
Yes,
exceeded the time,
because I
and
have to
Antonio
go.
might be. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I have another meeting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
So,
ma'am. The last question, sir. How can real world data be collected during war or humanitarian crisis be transformed into real world evidence to guide faster medical and pharmaceutical decision making?
Yeah, that's another good question. Thank you for that. I think independently of having war or humanitarian causes, real data should be collected on a regular basis, right? In different settings, because it's if the goal is noble, we can use real data to improve patient lives. At the end, that's what everybody is looking for, right? So I would not like to distinguish between periods of war or peace, or because it's always important. It's always important to have quality data. Now, if you ask me if the impact of a war would imply less resources, I mean financing, etc., then it would be even, I think, more important probably, because you would have to rely on quality data to decide the priorities, which are the patients that we should treat first, etc. But it's even hard to think like that, right? Having to take decisions on who to treat first. But anyway, it's, in my opinion, it should be always collected independently of the scenario.
I would once again like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to Professor Antonio Valente for sharing his valuable knowledge and expertise with us today. Your insights into the real world data and the real world evidence have provided us with a clearer perspective on how data is transforming the modern healthcare and the pharmaceutical decision making. I would also like to thank all the participants for taking the time to join us today and for making this session interactive and engaging. And SCRMP will be bringing more such webinars, so stay with us. Thank you very much. And we hope this webinar has added value to your academic and professional journey. Please stay connected with SCRMP for more such insightful webinars, workshops, and knowledge sharing sessions in the future. And I request all the participants to stay as we will be sharing the feedback form. And yes, this is Ratika signing off from today's webinar. Thank you everyone for joining us. Have a wonderful evening ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much
thank you
once
so
again
much.
for the invitation, and wish you a great weekend.
Thank you so much, Antonio. Thank you for your time. I'm really sorry for extending the session.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I
Yeah.
have a meeting and then I have to go with my kids to a medical appointment. Thank you so much.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so
Bye.
much. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
It was a pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Likewise. Bye.
Thank you so much, Ritika, for being a wonderful host for today's session. Thank you everyone for joining and being so interactive and patient while Antonio joined little bit late.
It was a pleasure, ma'am. Thank you very much.
We'll be having more such sessions from around the globe, not only from London or Spain. We'll be having from around the globe, and we'll be bringing more leaders from industry, from all the domains now. So stay tuned with us for more such engaging and exciting sessions. We are planning to have some interactive sessions also, where we'll be having a question answer sessions like that. So stay connected with us for more. Ritika, take over. What next steps you have to follow as per the agenda?
Yes, ma'am. I request all the participants to fill the feedback form kindly, and only those who fill the feedback form will be getting their certificates. Thank you.